welcome back to another video. Welcome to my channel, Venus and the Void. And thank you for stopping by on this cozy evening. Right now, I'm currently sitting in front of my window. There's a pretty loud thunderstorm going on outside, and I'm drinking my tea. This is a pineapple and soursop tea, so I'm gonna let that cool because it is steamy. I wish you guys could smell it. So in today's video, we are going to be continuing the conversation about the void. So we have been having a conversation about what the void is. My channel is named Venus and the Void because I want to discuss both embodiments of the light and dark feminine energy. I named my channel Venus and the Void specifically because I have an interest in studying the duality of feminine energy. And so, in my perspective, the void is a great way to capture that shadow side or the dark feminine side that is kind of obscure and not really talked about a lot in these conversations regarding feminine energy. I feel like we live in a world where everybody wants to associate feminine energy with like lightheartedness and lace and being girly. And being girly and being feminine are two completely different things. Both have their space in our lives. However, we need to honor both the light and the dark feminine. And I feel like Persephone's story is a great way to kind of start digging into that and kind of uncovering some of those themes. Now, Persephone is someone that you are going to hear me talk about a lot on this channel. And if I can be honest, she's my favorite goddess. I love Persephone. I think specifically she embodies the duality of good and of light and dark feminine. There's no such thing as good and bad feminine. There's light and dark, or divine and disordered, which is a whole nother conversation. She really embodies those themes. And so I thought we cannot have a conversation about feminine energy and the light and the dark without discussing the queen of the underworld herself, Persephone. Just as a little foreshadowing, I am going to be doing an entire series dedicated to Persephone, probably closer to like the spring equinox or maybe the winter equinox. I haven't decided, but you can expect an entire series dedicated to the life and lore of Persephone. In this video, we're only going to be talking about her descent into the underworld at a very general level and kind of how that relates to us when we're going through the void or the shadow. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Persephone. So at the beginning of the story, we meet Persephone in her core or maiden state. So what does that mean for someone to be in their core with the K-O-R-E, or maiden state? What that means is that she was a young, pure, innocent, naive girl. She was untouched. She still had her innocence about her. She had not known the love or the touch of a man. She had a bit of naivete. And in Persephone's case, she had a fiercely protective mother. Persephone's mother is Demeter, and she is the goddess of agriculture. So Demeter is the goddess of agriculture and all things that grow, and her offspring, which is Persephone, is the goddess of spring. Now, who is Persephone's father? That would be Zeus, the big god, the almighty god in Greek mythology. So she is the daughter of Zeus and also the daughter of Demeter, the goddess of agriculture. And so one day, while strolling through a meadow, she's picking flowers, and she stumbles across a beautiful flower she had never seen before. The name of this flower is actually called the narcissus. And the narcissus is an actual flower that grows out of the earth. You can look it up. It's a beautiful flower, beautiful flower. But in the story, it represents the ego and it represents allure. And so Persephone, curious about it, she had never seen this flower before. She reaches down to pick it. As she reaches down for the flower, the earth opens up And Hades, who is the god of the underworld, ascends in his black chariot. He swoops her away, seizes Persephone, and he sinks back down to the underground with her. And the earth closed up behind them. And so he took her to his lair in the underworld. So let's pause and do a check in on some of the symbolism that we just uncovered up until this point. So we have the archetype of the mother, which is Demeter. She is the mother. She's overbearing. She's loving. She's a little bit projecting onto her offspring, right? She's the goddess of agriculture. She embodied her daughter to be the goddess of spring because it's complementary to agriculture. Persephone's archetype is the maiden. The maiden is young, oftentimes prepubescent, effervescent. This is a curious mind, a naive mind. In her case, she's very pure. She has not known the touch of a man. And so she is curious and a little bit rebellious, which is why she wandered off to go follow after this flower. The earth splitting open when she reached for the flower represents the consciousness that we experience, that rupture of consciousness as we are metaphorically split open in terms of our spirituality, right? It represents the great awakening. It represents kind of like in tarot what we would call the tower moment, right? We would call that a tower moment, something happening against your will. Like, what the heck is happening? It is the thing that strikes you that creates a domino effect in your life and leads into your descent or ascension. Persephone's descent into the earth represents her shadow work. It represents the beginning of her transformation into her shadow self. And the mysterious dark figure that is known as Hades is not just a villain in the story. He is the metaphorical personification of the void. He is the shadow. Her shadow came up and swallowed her whole. He represents the death of the ego. So while she was in the underworld, Persephone was subject to Hades' request. And I will leave it to your imagination some of the things that happened at his request to Persephone. He was definitely in this for his pleasure. He was in this for his benefit. And so I'm going to leave that there. But just know that she went through some things that greatly raged her. It changed her. It transformed her as a person. She dealt with themes like separation, the loss of herself, and ego death. All things that we experience when we're going through our shadow, when we're faced with the void, and we are going right through the beginning of what eventually becomes our awakening. Right? The point of going through our descent is to ultimately reach our awakening. Now, what's fascinating about Persephone is that while she was in the underworld, she really made the best of her time. She actually learned a lot about herself. She understood how to speak the language of the dead, that which was a sacred language that only few knew. She allowed Hades to teach her that. She also began to understand symbolism. She understood that she had a great power, and she began to influence and reign over parts of the underworld alongside Hades. She came into contact with her sensuality, and she made peace with herself as a sensual woman. So although at the beginning of the story she was taken against her will into the underworld, we find that she is accepting of it. She accepts everything that comes with being part of the underworld. And in a way, when you consider the fact that Demeter, which is her mother, kept her so tightly wound and so close to the chest, this was really Persephone's first time being on her, quote unquote, on her own. And obviously these are tragic circumstances that nobody should be subjected to. However, Persephone was able to make the most out of that and learn and soak up as much knowledge. And we all know that knowledge is power. And so as she was learning the secrets of the underworld and learning the language of the dead, she was learning her power. So while Persephone was in the underworld, her mother Demeter, who had terrible separation anxiety from her daughter, went into a deep state of grief. And during this time, she went on strike. She refused, she absolutely refused to allow anything to grow. And as the goddess of agriculture, when she's on strike, nothing grows. So stocks began to die. The world became subject to famine. Humans on earth began to suffer. Mortals became sick and they died of starvation, nothing would grow because she was in protest without her daughter. Seeing this, Zeus, who is Persephone's father, who is really a shady character in this whole story, but I'll get to that in another video. Zeus hated to see the suffering of the world. And so what he did is he made a negotiation and he sent Hermes, the messenger, to come send for Persephone in the underworld. But before Persephone left the underworld, she made a choice. When you go to the underworld and you dwell in that place, if you eat any of the food in the underworld, you become bound to it in some way. And Persephone knew this. And so the interesting thing is that right before she ascended to come back and return home to Mount Olympus into the earthly realm, she took 6 pomegranate seeds and she ate them. Now, it's important to note that pomegranate is the fruit of knowledge. It's the fruit of esoteric secrets. It's the fruit of mysticism. It's also the fruit associated with integration and sensuality. And so, in Persephone choosing to eat 6 of the pomegranate seeds, this was her agreement into her initiation as the queen of the underworld. She went from being a prisoner of the underworld to being a sovereign ruler and the queen. And her choice to consume those pomegranate seeds represented her choice to sit in her power. It was her way of signing an esoteric spiritual contract with the underworld or with the void. She knew that by eating those seeds, that part of her spirit was going to be tied. Eating the pomegranate seeds, she bound herself to dwell in the underworld as its ruler for 6 months out of the year. This story is the way that the Greeks describe the different equinoxes, right? The way that the ancient Greeks believed it is that in the summer and the spring, Persephone is above ground. She's on Mount Olympus. She's in the earthly realm doing her goddess of spring duties. And when she descends back to her place in the underworld, that represents the 6 months that are fall and winter, when everything stops growing and everything becomes cold. This was how the Greeks described the cycle of life. You see, Persephone's story to me represents someone who, even though her consciousness was ruptured, even though everything that she known, like literally imagine the rug being pulled from underneath you and you still decide to go through the dark night of the soul. You're still choosing to go through and learn everything you can about yourself. She represents doing the shadow work. It represents the integration of the shadow, the integration of the dark feminine, the more conscious version of you. Her way of coming into contact with her sovereignty and her shadow. Similarly to how even the Bible, by eating the fruit from the tree of knowledge, is her way of walking towards self-possession and an awakening and higher truths. It opened her mind up to understand the cycles of life, the cycles of death. And she chose to see the underworld not as a punishment, but as a portal. And if you think about it, Persephone is so inspiring because we all go through this. We all go through the void at some point. I think that we should use her story as a mythic mirror to our lives, right? When we go through heartbreak or we go through depression or our spiritual awakening or our kundalini rising. So really quickly, let's recap the symbolism that we found in Persephone's story. Starting with the maiden or the core, Kore. That is the archetype that we met Persephone in. That archetype represents innocence, unawakened divine feminine, or the light feminine. Then we see the narcissus flower, which represents a foreshadowing. It represents the ego. It represents danger. Hades on his black chariot represents initiation and rebirth, and the void and the ego. Ultimately, the void. The underworld represents the shadow self. It represents the spiritual realm, the unconsciousness, the soul alchemy. The pomegranate seeds represents choice, sovereignty, sensual magic, and esoteric knowledge. Persephone's emergence into the earthly realm and the heavenly realm as the queen of the underworld represents her sovereignty, her coming into contact with her divine, dark feminine energy. And it represents her spiritual growth. Then the cycles of fall, winter, spring, and summer, and Persephone dwelling above ground and in the underworld for 6 months, and 6 months represents the life, death cycle, and rebirth. Persephone's story is a mythic mirror for any woman that goes through heartbreak. It's for any woman that goes through any type of loss or depression or betrayal. And ultimately, she chooses to reclaim her power and her sovereignty over the things that tried to beat her. It's about any woman who chose self discovery as opposed to self abandonment. It's here to remind us that the void is not a punishment, it's a portal for growth. And ultimately, although we meet Persephone in a state of mind where she is not free to choose her descent into the underworld and when it happened and how quickly it happened, when it happened, she was receptive. She remained receptive and open minded, and she was brave in the face of everything that could have ruined her. And ultimately, it allowed her to connect with her higher self. All right, guys, so that concludes the story of Persephone. I hope that you found it valuable. If you feel like you are in a void, or if you're in the dark night of the soul, the way that, we just learned about Persephone, know that you are just being remade. You are being made new. And hopefully you liked this video, and you found value in it. And if you did, please like it and comment down below. I really like to know what you guys see as valuable, for me to post. So stay tuned for another video coming out this week. I think you're really going to like it. Take care.